We don't have a men's health policy. We don't have a minister for men's health. Men dominate the stats in suicide. 95% of workplace deaths are men. 93% of military deaths are men. Men dominate in heart disease, prostate cancer, road deaths, incarceration, less likely to complete education, postnatal depression. However, in this year's federal budget, I think something like 10 billion went towards women's health, 0 to men.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Finding Equilibrium show. Delighted to be here, delighted you're here, and delighted that my guest today is Rae Bonney. And good morning, Rae. It's so lovely to see you. It feels like we've been talking for ages, and you're busy, I'm busy, and then finally here we are having a conversation. So Rae is a men's health and mental health specialist, and it's such a super interesting area. As a man myself, obviously, I am very interested in this topic. But for people who aren't familiar with you, Rae, and the work that you do, I'd love you to take a moment or two just to introduce yourself more formally to the audience.
Well, thanks, Lawrence. And also thank you for inviting me today as well. We have been having these extended conversations, and likewise, I've been watching you running all over the world doing amazing work in workplaces. And it's kind of how we met, because a lot of the work that I do, typically I'm found in workplace environments. So my sweet spot is definitely high risk, male dominated, blue collar environments. Construction, mining, manufacturing. I'm actually at a manufacturing plant today at Chobani. They make very wonderful yogurt, so we might be interrupted by a few milk trucks. But I really love those environments. I'm often invited in when somebody's killed themselves in the workplace or has died in a workplace tragedy, and I perform all of the crisis management and trauma management stuff to ensure business as usual, but also to have that enormous privilege of working with people at such a vulnerable time. And often that will lead for me to help organizations develop that higher end policy and strategy around mental health in the workplace and everything in between. So anything that touches the human condition in the workplace, I love getting involved in. And I was very lucky back in about 2014 to be consulting with Beyond Blue when they did amazing world first research into developing a return on investment strategy around why organisations should invest in the mental health of their people in workplace with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And, I was involved in that at the time. So really front and centre to that early adoption of really addressing workplace mental health. And it was just such an amazing time to be travelling around Australia and talking to workplaces about their attitudes towards mental health, and using this amazing body of research to justify why doing something about it will definitely hit the bottom line, because that's what businesses want to know about, right? So I learned a lot from that, and very grateful to Beyond Blue for inviting me to be part of that evolutionary piece. And from there, I actually became an ambassador for Beyond Blue, and I'm about to hit my 10-year anniversary of being an ambassador. So
congratulations, amazing.
Thank you. I'm very lucky. It feels like thousands of events, or thousands of hours, definitely thousands of people where I'm able to tell my story. But I'm also the vice president of the Australian Men's Health Forum, and we're the peak body here for men's health in Australia, and do a lot of work around trying to encourage our government to develop policy and strategy for men's health, because at the moment we don't have a men's health policy, we don't have a funded men's health strategy, we don't have a minister for men's health. We actually invest nothing into men's health specifically. So if you imagine, the rates of things like, suicide. Men dominate the stats in suicide. 95% of workplace deaths are men. 93% of military deaths are men. Men dominate in heart disease, prostate cancer. Women can't get prostate cancer. Road deaths, incarceration, less likely to complete education. Look, I could go on and on. Postnatal depression. It's incredible the amount of things that affect men's health. However, in this year's federal budget, I think something like 10 billion went towards women's health, 0 to men.
Zero.
So 0.
Really?
I mean, men will be funded in certain things that are generic, but specific stuff like, male suicide, for example, will not get specific funding.
Why is that? So let's kind of jump into this as a topic. I mean, there's a couple of questions that I have before we jump into that, because I'm curious to start why you personally are so passionate about men's health, and what kind of took you in that direction. And then then I'd love to understand more about the narrative, because it seems extraordinary that the level of funding is so out of balance.
And that's a global thing as well. That's not just here in Australia. But I guess, my reason for sitting here today, ever since I can remember, I've had a fascination for people. I just love watching everything about the human condition. And that's why I never tire for what I do, because every time I meet a new person, it's like unwrapping a present. But, unfortunately, I was raised in a really traumatic environment where men were perpetrators of things that made my life very, very difficult. And, growing up in that environment, it was terrifying and very, very traumatizing. And I did get out of there at a very young age. But I remember coming out of that environment with this real sense of what happened to them to make them do that to me, which I feel really fortunate. I mean, I had a certain amount of, being a victim of that as well, and that attitude. And, on that, as I developed relationships with men, very good men, by the way, I was still very broken and very confused about who I was and what had happened around me. And so therefore I was very violent in my relationships towards men and behaved very, very badly. And, back then, no one was talking about mental health or behaviours. So I was able to slip under the radar quite a bit, not the men that I was in relationships with. However, it took me, not too long, fortunately, to realise the common denominator in all the things that were negatively affecting my life, and certainly demise of all of my relationships. I was that common denominator, and had to have a time of reflection that was very humiliating and shameful to reflect on my behaviours and understand what was going on. So I guess, coupled with my fascination for people and my experience of men, I also had very good men in my life, and uncle and, a few other men that have been great influences in my life, who have really helped me understand masculinity, and that masculinity is beautiful. Masculinity is vulnerable, and it's sweet, it's caring, it's generous, it's all these wonderful things that we don't speak about. We only tend to attach toxic to masculinity. So that, in a nutshell, that is what led me to have this interest in men's health, but also the stats that I just described to you. The gaps for men, and a lot of these things lead to the inevitable suicide. So why wouldn't we be doing something about this? It's a real opportunity, because men are leaving women, they're leaving daughters, they're leaving nieces. It affects absolutely everybody. So my work certainly is not to the exclusion of women, it's for the inclusion of everybody. So thank you for listening to my reasons for being here today.
No, and thank you for sharing that. So it's like when I listen to you, speak, I hear that you've almost gone through so you've become face to face with the toxic masculinity, but you were able through your own journey to almost step outside of that and look at the reasons that were really creating that and get a much more balanced perspective that.
Well, and I would have to interrupt and say, the word toxic masculinity doesn't sit with me very well, because these men and many other men, it's masculinity that exists. But if somebody is broken and somebody has been traumatized, or we behave in a way where there's an outcome for that. So it's got nothing to do with masculinity. And we can talk about that later when we talk about how boys are being raised, how that can turn into behaviors that are not conducive to good outcomes.
No, thank you for that. So let's talk about the narrative and the narrative and what's really, I guess, driving the allocation of resources in terms of supporting men at this present point in time.
It's a really, really big conversation, and I'm going to speak very anecdotally from my own experience. So, many people may agree to disagree with me, but you think about the domestic violence industry, because it is an industry. It makes a lot of money and it gets a lot of attention. But domestic violence here in Australia and around the world is only a woman's issue, and occasionally a children's issue, and men only being perpetrators. So we look at, even crisis services like Men's Line or 1-800-RESPECT. It's all very female focused, and the assumption always is that a man has been a perpetrator. Even if a man presents with injuries and experiences of violence, it's the first port of call will be, okay, what did you do in this situation to make that happen? So I think that because this domestic violence industry has become so big, coupled with the Me Too movement, and this again is only my experience and a small part of it, but we're just hearing this over and over and over again. It's just perpetuating this attitude and this experience that people are almost having through the media of men, where we are believing it. And so therefore, if governments, you think about, politics is politics, and that's what runs our governments. And then there's money attached to that. It's not very sexy for us to be apportioning money to men when the assumption is that, white male privilege, the patriarchy, domestic violence, all of these things, that men don't deserve anything. Why do men need anything when they already rule the world? They take all the jobs. They're terrible. We need to fear men. So for a government to be popular, they're not going to be allocating a lot of attention to men. And again, that's my experience, and that's my thoughts. So and that's a small part of it.
It's interesting, but those statistics that you shared are, they're factual, so you can't ignore them. So just
they're real, because they're dead.
Yeah,
they're dead.
Completely. So when you look at workplaces, are you seeing it gradually changing? Because the suicides, the prostate cancer, the mental health issues that you're experiencing are real and are affecting families, are affecting communities. Are you seeing a gradual shift in terms of allocating resources towards men's health?
I am, Lawrence, and I feel so incredibly proud to be part of this shift as well, because I've been banging on about this in earnest for a good 13 years, and to begin with, not at all. But even sitting here at Chobani, Chobani are an amazing organisation who really invest in their people, like, talking about that Beyond Blue return on investment strategy. They actually genuinely engage me to care for their people. So it's not a box tick. They're very, very transparent in the way that they care for their people, and it has a definite outcome because we're able to collect data. I also recently was very, very lucky to do a national roadshow around Australia and parts of New Zealand for a civil construction organisation who are another one of my clients. So, you know, the whole month of Safe Work Month, as part of their operations review, was literally going out into the field of civil construction, you know, bridge building, water treatment, and standing with men in the dirt and talking to them about their health, their mental health, their physical health. And it was just so incredibly inspiring to see how men have each other's back, to see how men are truly vulnerable. And I was able to collect a lot of data out of that, you know, month-long event through, you know, and quite a few hundred men. And what came out was just men have such an appetite to really care for themselves, but actually don't feel like they have permission. And the resources aren't there. So, you know, we talk about male suicide. You know, the assumption is that men are experiencing mental health problems and therefore kill themselves, whereas most male suicide is not attributable to a mental health problem, but what I call the trifecta in a crisis is relationship breakdown, followed by financial distress, followed by custody issues with kids. And again, when I was out in the field, I heard the same story over and over again, coupled with domestic violence issues of men being violated. I just had to qualify that in case we were confused there. So I know for a fact that there were 5 men who had a plan to kill themselves during this month-long event who are still now here. So that's your investment, and it's creating an environment that supports good mental health, safety, and dignity and pride, not telling men what to do, but as I said, you know, preserving that dignity and pride, and most of all, the masculinity. Men will talk, men will cry, men will open up, and men will seek help. That's the kind of environments that we need to be creating and investing in.
No, I completely agree. So when you look at the other end, if you like, raising boys, because it starts as children, what do we do? Like, how can we change the narrative? Because what you described is very much the mainstream narrative and the way a lot of people will think, because they're hearing it all the time. You know, they're hearing it and it's in their mind. So, and if you keep hearing it, it forms your beliefs. If we're suddenly starting to change it, and you're experiencing, I'm certainly experiencing a similar thing, a kind of a new, like an emotional shift in men who are, and you use the word permission. And I think a lot of it is about giving men permission to recognize that we have emotions, and if we have emotions, we have to express those emotions somehow. And it does start as children. You know, the way I was brought up, it very much, there was a belief that, you know, boys don't cry, and, you know, and it becomes part of who you are until you get to a point in time when something kind of shifts and you think, well, maybe that belief isn't actually true, and maybe there is a different way, and it's through the men's table that I'm part of, the men's sheds, that, you know, those types of groups, that you do suddenly, as a man, become exposed to different narratives, and it starts to chip away. But from a child, like as a parent, how do you create and raise healthy boys, you know, so that boys do grow up in a more balanced way and are able to appreciate their masculinity, appreciate, you know, who they are as people, so that we are creating healthier men, healthier communities, healthier families, you know, and all of the things that we see as problems become in much smaller parts of our culture and our society. I'd love your perspective on raising boys.
Thanks for asking. I get a little bit emotional when I talk about this. I have 2 boys myself.
I know. I feel emotional, to be honest, you know, but I think, you know, crying on air is not great, but it really does.
No, it is. It's fine. It's fine. I just have to like go like that so I don't wreck all my makeup. You know?
No, I know. You know, but it is a big problem, and, you know, it is an emotion. And, like, you know, what you said before about the 5 men who are still here, you know, that of course is, you know, we're talking about life and death here. You know, we're not talking about some nice to have, you know, we are talking about people who exist, who feel that their life isn't worth living for whatever reason. And if you can prevent that, And there's many stories, I've heard many stories of people who got to the edge of the cliff but didn't jump off, and of course become, stronger beings because of it. And so, and they're the stories that we do need to, we do need to share. But it is,
That's right. But in answer to your question, I think, and this isn't for everyone also, because there are people that raise their boys so beautifully. However, I think generally boys' feelings and safety is quite disposable. And we when we're talking about raising boys, there's this idea that we drag boys up, we drag them up. But it's how we show boys, because I'm pretty certain boys don't come out of their mothers not having emotion or not seeking help or not caring about themselves. They're actually shown not to. And we still, it doesn't matter how, I hear it all the time, don't cry. I heard of a 5-year-old boy the other day during this roadshow. The mother told me that his school teacher, when he's 5 in prep, became emotional, and the teacher told him not to cry, but blink instead. So if he blinks, he's not going to cry. And then he couldn't stop crying, so she banished him to a classroom somewhere to stop crying. So, we're still doing this, but, safety as well. Boys are taught from a very early age to not hurt girls. Let's just simplify it. But there's no reverse of that. There's no gender swap for that girls have to be respectful of boys. And, I was watching an episode of The Block this year, that house thing. And I pulled this clip out and I actually put it on social media. And this is such a great example of reversing genders. One of the contestants is running after her partner going, "Tom, I'm going to effing punch your effing face in if you don't whatever." If you reverse the genders on that, it would never have, he would be in jail, for example.
It's true.
Or, yesterday I was seeing a client, and he was talking about when he was a little boy, he had the most wonderful Italian grandmother who he loved so much. And he said she used to get really angry at times, and she'd beat me, she'd belt me. Once she beat me over the head with a fry pan. She was such a strong, amazing woman. And I said, think about what you just said. Reverse the genders. If that was a grandfather doing that to a granddaughter, different. So we actually have to change our attitudes and show boys that they are important human beings, and they are worthy of care, and they're worthy of respect. And, even in sporting culture here in Australia, it's huge. And you see, AFL, the more injured you are and you keep playing, that makes you so heroic and you're even more admired. Whereas, that's actually self-harm. That's actually self-harm, playing on a broken foot.
Yeah, it is.
So it's we're changing how we see things, or, and the media instill a lot of this stuff as well in what we deem as being sexy or being right. So grandmothers should not hit their grandkids.
Yes.
But even corporal punishment. One of my best friends in the whole world, Ken Lyons, he's 98, and I went with him to Caulfield Grammar Carol's night the other night. And I got a bit curious because I'm very inquisitive, and I sort of did a bit of research, back into what school would have been like, for Ken Lyons in the 1930s, And I learned that in Queensland and Western Australia, corporal punishment is still legal.
Really?
Yes.
Today, really?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, when I went to school, they still had the cane and the strap and everything, only for boys, not for girls. That is still happening.
Really? I'm
Do you think that the shame and the humiliation and all the things that go on with that is still happening?
Still happening. I'm shocked that it's happening
Yeah,
today.
me too. Yeah.
Golly. So where do we go from here? So when you look at men's health and men's mental health, I know that
Yeah.
you're going to see lots of different, lots of different problems. But what can we do? Because we can't change the media, we can't change the narrative, but we can change the way we think about things and the way we communicate to our own children. Just really catching ourselves in terms of trying to have a more balanced view, so that people are respectful of each other, whether they're male or female, and that it doesn't get out of balance in terms of fulfilling some of these outdated stereotypes, let's say, in terms of how a boy should be or how a man should be, so that we can create more balanced people. But when you look through the work that you do and you see the at the coalface, so to speak, the mental health challenges, what are you seeing? Like, help us understand how those challenges manifest themselves, and what we can do to support boys and men in a better way.
There's about a million ways I could answer that, but I think one thing I love about human beings is our ability to adapt. And, you look at COVID, for example, things changed very, very quickly, and the human condition rallied and it adapted. And, traditionally we look at the human condition. Back in the day, we'd be very excited about our IQ and measuring our IQ and what that meant. And then, it was a little bit longer after that we realized that, IQ was one thing, but we needed to measure EQ as well to be able to bring IQ to life. So EQ being your emotional quotient. And then once that was established, then things were making a bit more sense. But the thing we actually always miss is our AQ, and that's our adaptability and agility quotient. So that's how we're so flexible. So we're smart or not, and we're emotional or we're not. But how do we actually then flex through life with that? So measuring how adaptable and agile we are is also really important. And I hearken back, I was sort of around, I started in the workforce in the very, very early 80s, when there was no address to health and safety at all, nothing formal. And then watching how that sort of came to life when we started bringing in OH&S and WHS and all of these measurements and boundaries, for care. And I remember, I think I was working at Black & Decker at the time, and then later on ICI, and it was sort of like, this is bullshit. Like, no one's ever going to be wearing this high vis shit, like, really? And now look at us, you go on a work site without it, and people are panicking. So that's changed. Back when I was a kid, people would throw their rubbish out the window of their car. You would never do that now. The change is possible. The smoking debate, when every restaurant in the world was going to shut down if people couldn't smoke in them, never happened. Hospitality is actually tripled in size. So that gives me hope. And I thank you again for inviting me on your podcast, because anytime somebody says, can you open your mouth and talk about this? Like, the answer is yes, because that makes the change. And I was speaking at an event at Royal Melbourne Golf Club the other day at the Australian Women's Golf Network. And they didn't really know what I was going to talk about. And I thought, here we go, this is going to be very interesting. And I spoke to them as I'm speaking to you now, with as much passion and ferociousness as I could. And they loved it, because they'd never heard it. They didn't know about it, because, again, so seduced by our media and the narrative. Afterwards, I heard, stories about, my dad actually killed himself, and it wasn't until you spoke that I realized there could have been so much more we could have done. Things like that. So that's where change happens, is when we take the time to, open our mouth respectfully and thoughtfully and show people what is possible.
Yeah. It's through education, through sharing, that we are chipping away at that.
Yeah. And challenging the narrative, really challenging it.
Yeah, completely. Wonderful. Well, we're almost out of time, so I've got one.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or
That
not,
has gone so fast.
it goes so fast. But I
Yeah.
mean, we talk a lot about balance. And this podcast is called the Finding Equilibrium show. And I guess I have one last question I ask all of my guests, and it's, what does finding equilibrium mean to you personally? And you know, well, that's probably the question. And the second part is, what do you do to keep yourself in balance, given all of your responsibilities and the change that you're driving, you know, bit by bit? What do you do to find your own equilibrium each and every day?
Well, each and every day is different for me, but I live with chronic depression and anxiety and often suicidal thoughts. You know, as a result of my childhood trauma. So for me to manage everything, I have to do that really thoughtfully and very, very carefully. And sometimes I don't do it very well at all. And will have to work very, very hard to ensure that I keep some kind of balance and some kind of level of energy that I can continue turning up. Because I am self-employed, and this is a space where, you know, I rely on my voice and my brain and my body to get things done. So one thing I've sort of realized in the last few years is who I surround myself with is really important, because we have a certain energy about that. And, you know, we're chemical beings, so we have reactions to each other. And, you know, I'm the kind of person who, you know, my natural baseline, I talked about depression and anxiety and suicidality, but my natural baseline is happiness. Like, I'm a happy, buoyant, positive person by nature. However, managing my little ecosystem, when I'm out working and presenting, you know, people will see that version of me, which is real. However, socially, I'm incredibly anxious. So I don't like going out socially. I don't like small talk. I find it really, really awkward. But people won't accept that in me because I'm not like that. Because I got told once, but you wear red lipstick. Like that's a true story. And you wear bright colors. So, wow. So, you know, a couple of years ago, I sort of made a decision that I was going to be really turn up and be very authentic to my community and say, I can't do that because. So this year, you know, I've recently had an experience of somebody who said, Rae, you've got to come to this event because it's going to be so much fun and I really want you to come with me. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't, because I don't want to go out at night time. I mean, I've always had a problem with alcohol growing up, so I don't like being around alcohol a lot. And I said, no, I can't. So this person said to me, no, you have to. I really need to push you out of your comfort zone and get you out of this. And I said, get fucked. You do not need to push me. I'm way out of my comfort zone most days, and I'm fine with that. But please don't tell me what I need, because I know what I need, and I know what I need to be safe, and I know what I need to be healthy. And that means I've transferred my nights. When people have a nightlife, that's my morning. So I get up at 5 a.m, I walk my dog, I meet people in the park, I have a chat, I do all of that. That's how I reverse my life to manage. So my message, I think, to anyone who's listening, when people are trying to tell you what they need to be healthy and safe, please believe them. Don't try and railroad them into what you want them to do. You know, Lawrence, have another piece of cake. And Lawrence is like, I'm a secret diabetic. Like, no, Rae, I can't. Come on, Lawrence, just have it, you know. It's because that's because I want. So check in with yourself, people. If it's about what you want, just leave it.
I think that's awesome advice. Yeah, because I think our intentions are often good, but we're not actually thinking about the impact of those intentions. Golly, Rae, I feel we need to come back for a part 2, because it's such a big topic, and we've just scratched the surface. But I'd love to acknowledge you, first of all, for the work that you do and for raising awareness of something, because it's always hard when there's a big narrative and you're actually you've got a different narrative that you're actually sharing. But I take a lot of comfort too with those stories, because it's only after a long period of time that you look back, say over 20 years, and you realize how things do change. Big things do change. It's just they take a long while, but they start with people like you who are passionate and championing a different way of thinking, which eventually catches on. And then you look back and you think, wow, did people really believe that in the time? Of course they did, and
Yes.
there was a time when it was normal to smoke in the offices, and if you suggested that someone didn't, then it was like,
Yeah.
weirdo. But now, of course, it's completely the opposite. So the
Mm.
context and the time really does really does make a difference. And we've gone through this period, and we're out of balance as a society, and we're ignoring 50% of society effectively, because of where resources are allocated. But bit by bit, I'm sure we'll start to see that rebalance, and we'll start to have a lot more appreciation of the value that men and women and families and communities really play in supporting our total health, as well as our mental health. Where can people find more about you, get in touch, work with you? I'd love to know, how you help organizations to support their employees.
Oh, thank you for asking. You can just Google me, Rae Bonney. That's RaeBonney. You'll find me on YouTube. I have a radio show every month, which I'm going to air this Sunday, and interviewing an amazing man who does a lot of work in solo parenting for men, and he's got a lot of great things to talk about there. So that's on 94.1 FM, 3WBC. So Rae Bonney at YouTube, or if you just Google Rae Bonney, you'll find my website that will tell you a lot of information about what I do in workplace, in advocacy, in men's health, as public speaking. And I also have a private practice as well, where I work one-on-one with a whole range of people, not just men, helping people make sense of their lives. In fact, I don't help and I don't give advice. They're two things I don't do, but I can work out your jigsaw puzzle for you. But thank you. Please get in touch, or you can email me at rae@raebonney.com. Everything's got my name attached to it. It's easy.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Rae. Thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for sharing. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for your attention. And we will see you next time.